Welcome to the third episode of my podcast, The Never-Ending Experiment. I'm Kim Anderson. This episode is going to be all about ethnobotany. It's really just an introduction and kind of explaining why I'm so interested in this subject. It's known as the science of survival for a good reason, because it has to do with how we human beings interact with plants. You could say how we use plants, but that is narrowing it too much. So the ethno part means culture, and the botany, of course, refers to plants. It's a very interdisciplinary subject. It overlaps a whole bunch of other things. Of course, ethnobiology is the larger discipline under which it falls. So ethnozoology, ethnomycology, those things as well, of course, are important. But botany is special. I think I've just always loved plants. I've had an obsession with plants since I was very young. And I grew up with those raspberries and baby carrots and peas and all the good food plants that you can get from the garden. And I was always kind of disappointed that my parents weren't as into plants. And so we didn't have a vegetable garden, but I was always sticking in some sunflowers or beans into the landscaped backyard, trying to get some other plants growing myself. And I've also had an obsession with the wild plants. We grew up close to the edge of the city and Calgary, and we went for walks in the countryside, and there are all kinds of wildflowers growing in the ditches. And so I often tried to collect some of the seeds, and it was never very successful, but it has been a lifelong obsession. I'm still not done trying. Just recently, I was disappointed to find some of the seeds that I saved. Some of them grew, some of them didn't. It's just something that I've always loved, and so I was drawn to ethnobotany. So I was also interested in anthropology. Ethnobotany would also fall under anthropology, which is just the study of human beings and cultures. Ethnobotany is the complex interactions between people and plants. I think it's a bit egocentric to say that we're the ones in control of this. In many ways, plants have relied on us to propagate them, as they rely on the wind and other animals as well. Some of the other disciplines that ethnobotany overlaps with is food and medicine, economics, because how we trade in plants has a huge influence on our cultures and on history. The spice trade had a huge influence on human history. Wood, lumber, furniture, clothing, the list goes on. There really are so many different things. And of course, in that ethno side, which is sort of what my background is in fine arts and culture, there is all kinds of influence with plants. The aesthetics of plants, especially flowers, is well known. People love flowers. It makes them happy. So many of our art is decorated with plants and flowers. I just compulsively have always drawn veins and plants and roots and flowers since I was very young. Indigenous culture, of course, is very important in ethnobotany. A big reason is just that Indigenous people have worked with plants and have had to understand plants for a long time in order to survive. Again, ethnobotany, the science of survival. So we need plants to survive. Plants don't really need us to survive, but if we were to all disappear, then probably plant evolution would start taking some different directions. We really have had a very big influence on what kind of plants continue to grow and where they grow. A lot of the invasive species that have come with people. And a lot of immigrants bring the seeds of their homeland with them, and a lot of the invaders and travelers find new seeds to bring back to their own cultures, and often without ever meeting the people that grew them, without ever going to those places. It's hard to imagine, Indian cooking without chili peppers, or Italian food without tomatoes, or Eastern European food without potatoes, or even Mexican food without cilantro. These are all plants that were introduced after uh, European colonization. So there was a lot of plants moving from one place to another. Even African slaves that came over to the Americas brought seeds with them. You can imagine they didn't have much that they were able to even hold on to, but seeds are so small, so they can travel very quickly. So the influence of seeds and plants on culture is really phenomenal. It's hard to really even measure. The influence of plants on medicine, of course, is huge, and we've seen a really big transition just in my lifetime because we are all living under the oppression of these patenting laws, which influences people who are making medicine to try to make a medicine that they can patent so that they can own it and it isn't shared. But plants can't be owned, although, of course, genetic modification organizations are trying to change that so that they can own specific DNA. But for the most part, herbal medicines can't be owned, and so there's less of a incentive. But what I've seen changing in the last generation is a move towards more biological medicine. And I think that's why there's been an increase in the kind of cures that are happening lately. Even if you look at what happened during the pandemic, there were, of course, the first mRNA vaccines that came out, which a lot of people were afraid of because they were not used very much. It's kind of a new technology, but then when Novavax and Medicago came out, which were using more biological medicine and using plants and phytochemicals are the chemicals within plants, then you know what? Suddenly the pandemic stopped being top news story. So I think that those companies really were effective and maybe in a way that people aren't really talking about. I was waiting on those companies to come out with their vaccines, and even though I didn't use them myself, I definitely noticed that some other countries were getting on board with that, and then suddenly the pandemic wasn't such a big deal, and they started loosening up a lot of the rules. So I think there is a connection there, and I think that the positive impact of biological medicine is a big part of ethnobotany. And there are all kinds of herbal medicines out there that are in use that haven't been studied. A lot of them have been studied. It's been predicted that around a quarter of the medicines that we have now available, the pharmaceutical medicines, were directly from herbal medicine, and a lot of people don't know that. They don't really know the history of those medicines. They tend to think that science just invents things out of nowhere in a laboratory, but they're using nature and they're using the organisms that are out there in order to understand them. So not only do you have the plants themselves in their raw form that can be a medicine, but then we have all kinds of ways that we human beings extract and modify and process those plants to create an even larger number of potential medicines and other products. Just to be interested in plants for their own sake, there's all kinds of tests and experiments that are being done on plants to try to understand them. They are living beings just like us. They are organisms. They have DNA just like us. We share a lot of the same genes. We share a lot of the same types of bodies, like that there are parallels in the way our animal bodies work and what they look like, and the genes involved are a parallel to those of plants. So that's one way too that we gain, strength from consuming plants when they have these similar structures within them that can help our bodies as well. I don't know, say that I'm really a foodie, but I like food, and I can't even say whether I eat to live or live to eat. I do a bit of both. I think a lot of times because I've done so much research into food and I started very young. I was 11 years old when I decided to become vegetarian. So culture and food is such a big thing, and that's a huge part of ethnobotany, and that's been something I'm very interested in. And lately there's been a lot of food shortages around the world. We are in a time of overshoot, which is that we have We're using more resources than we can replenish on the planet right now. And of course, food is a big part of that. So, food security has become a really big deal. And I know that that's been a big part of my life and the people around me lately. I am hoping to turn my yard into a permaculture yard. And so, as someone interested in ethnobotany, to finally have my own yard and be able to work on a garden, I've spent the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years, trying to ID and identify all of the plants, and I still haven't done it. There's just so many, and I'm not sure what's what. I'm slowly learning what each plant is, and it's an incredibly huge area of knowledge. And actually, the best source of information for me has been the local gardening group on Facebook, because everybody has similar plants that are growing in their yards and similar invasives that have come to take over. So you have to really look directly around you when you're working with plants, because they travel whether you like it or not. I know a wild strawberry seems to have popped up in my yard, and I have a rock garden, which is very unusual. I think rock gardens are mostly common in Japan. It's been a big, overwhelming project for me to get into that and to try to understand what my place is in ethnobotany. I think right now, today, most people associate ethnobotany with psychedelics, and there is a lot of research into psychedelics and ethnobotany, and I am definitely interested in that as well. But for me, because of my condition, I've had to really look at which ones are going to work. And I did have some insight into that. I'm not going to say too much about it now, but hopefully that will become more real in the future. I've been looking for the right plant medicine to use for a neurological illness, because there's really not a lot. And I think the reason why we don't hear that much about what works well for neurological illnesses is because a lot of them are psychedelics. And there is a cultural kind of mind control issue with that. And I think a lot of that is coming from the patriarchal Abrahamic mindset, which is to control and subdue nature. We want to continue to have life here, and sadly not everyone does. I do. I like other species. I don't know why so many people don't care about other plants and animals, but I certainly do. So in order to be not a steward, I don't like that concept, to be a co-participant in this ecosystem on this planet, I think that science is there as a tool to help us. When you start looking at traditional knowledge and you start examining it scientifically, it's really been incredible to see how much of those ideas of Indigenous people were in fact very scientifically valid. And I think it's because of that that there is such a motivation to continue learning about them. Looking at neurology as a whole means opening up to the possibility that sometimes the solution for a neurological illness could involve psychoactive drugs that need to stop being criminalized and vilified, because a lot of them are very, very therapeutic and very important, and could hold the key to our own survival on this planet in the future, because they may allow us to become actually more intelligent and get better ideas. And that's something to embrace and look forward to. One area of ethnobotany that I'm very interested in is contraception and reproductive medicine. We are raised in a time where the birth control pill is considered to be sort of the be-all and end-all of contraception, as though there was never any contraception before in all of time, and suddenly we discovered it and science discovered it, and it's all about Western medicine. That's not the truth at all. There are dozens, I don't know how many, there are many, many, many contraceptive herbs in many different cultures. The US government alone documented dozens of contraceptive herbs used by the Indigenous people in just in the United States. And I found quite a number of herbs as well that were used by Indigenous people, and also herbs that were used in Eurasia. The giant fennel plant apparently was such a popular contraceptive that it went extinct. They used it so much that it's no longer around. And the birth control pill itself was based after the Mexican yam. And so that's hardly just a scientific breakthrough. That's something that was passed on from traditions of the land. And so I think we need to respect the indigenous source of that and remember that actually the whole concept of pro-choice and being able to manipulate your own reproduction is quite possibly the beginning of medicine itself for all of humanity. And there are some people that believe that it was actually in the matriarchal traditions of the past who learned the most about medicine directly through reproductive medicine. And there's no question that as a species, we are not the best at reproducing. We have a lot of issues and problems, and that's why there is a high maternal mortality rate in natural childbirth. And a lot of the interventions in medicine can also cause other issues, physical issues. So, we're not the best at giving birth. And I think it's okay to say that. Some people want to always be positive and make everything into some sacred perfection. But the truth is, compared to some other species, some of them are worse at reproduction as well. There are some animals that can't survive past reproduction. So an octopus will nurse their eggs until they hatch and then not long after will pass away. So that is also the other side of it. It is a huge tax on the system to reproduce and to have children. And so as someone who has a physical illness that I know I could pass on, and now I understand that more than I ever did in my 20s, and I'm glad that I did not have children then, because what I've seen with people with a similar illness is that it does hold you back a lot, and it can have very serious physical side effects to go through childbirth, and also to pass on a genetic disease is something that I would never want to do. So contraception is a big one that I'm interested in, and that's partly because, as I said, the birth control pill was such a big deal, but actually if there's all these other herbs out there that are known to have some contraceptive abilities, and I use contraception in a very general term, but there's a lot of more specific ways to do that, anywhere from sterilization and prevention of being able to produce eggs or sperm, all the way till abortion, and there are herbal abortificants out there as well. I'm not about to go recommending people use it. Hopefully you live in a place where abortion is legal. It's something that I hope to continue studying. It is part of the next book that I'm writing, which isn't necessarily about ethnobotany, but it is looking at evolution, population, and reproduction. It's a big part of ethnobotany too, economics, food economics especially, or even lumber economics, or different kinds of plants that we use out there for building and things like that, and clothing, of course, because we use so much fiber, cotton, bamboo now, and other fibers for clothing, and how we trade those things, especially internationally now, has really an enormous effect on food security and on the ecology. It's kind of crazy to think Turkey's, selling millions of tons of wheat to Russia, and Russia's selling millions of tons of wheat to Turkey, and it's a very strange system, where you think, why aren't they just keeping their own wheat? And that has to do with economics. Economics really influences everyone. Economics has influenced most of the decisions that I've made in some way or another, and you can't always control how much money you have, and you can't control how much money people want from you a lot of the time. So that's something, to think about too with ethnobotany and the direction. I think that actually ethnobotany has a lot to contribute potentially to economics. One of the projects that has been accomplished with ethnobotany is a formula for determining what the rate of replenishment of a specific type of plant is and how to determine that mathematically. If we used that kind of formulas for other resources, that could even give us an opportunity to determine exactly how much we could use of a certain plant without exhausting the resources for it, so that we're not taking too much. And that could go for both agriculture and for taking plants from the wild. Because even if you're taking plants from the wild, you have to give back in order to make sure that that plant continues to grow well into the future. And that's something that Indigenous people are very aware of. And, they give gratitude. I think gratitude is more an acknowledgement that this other organism is giving to you to help you to survive. And in a way, you owe them now that's part of your, karma. That's part of your economics. Economics and ecology, they come from the same root word, eco. And eco means everything. So if you're someone that doesn't think that the environment or ecology is important, you're basically saying that you don't think that everything is important. That's a pretty weird opinion to have, I think. I think everything probably is important. So that's been really interesting to see how to take this kind of artificial environment of a rock garden and turn it into permaculture and turn it into something that's going to last, whether there are people here or not, to put back some of those native plants that maybe haven't grown here for a while. It's not that easy to just reclaim land and make it perfect again and plan it out perfectly, because there are so many factors to each plant. You could look at companion planting, when two species or more species of plants have benefits to each other and can offer protection or support. Sometimes it's directly through their biochemistry in ways that may not be fully understood. In other ways, it could be one of the plants will attract a predator of some of the pests of the other plant. Sometimes it is a direct pest deterrent. And I think that pest deterrence is really something we should be looking more at rather than pesticides. You have to get over the idea that you're going to ever save 100% of your crops and not have any other species come eat it. Of course they will. So in a way, you have to grow a little bit more, just knowing that other creatures are going to come consume it. I think we really, really need to step back from this whole obsession with pesticides and herbicides. There are better ways to deal with the plants and animals that are invading our space, and just look at yourself and maybe understand that to other animals, we are the pests. We're the biggest pests out there, and we are self-annihilating through pesticides because we are harming ourselves. And that's already been proven, and sadly, industries have a lot of power to shut down intelligent science. But just use your common sense. Going into the world and killing off a bunch of other species, it's just not a smart way to live your life. We are all organisms, and we have evolved for millions of years to depend on other organisms. Our flesh is the same as any other creature. We're all one biosphere. And so the more that you connect to that, the better off we'll be. And I believe that the science of ethnobotany has so much to teach us, and that we can find a meeting point between science and spirituality